Results. For formerly incarcerated participants in the study, a total of 69% of them indicated that personal and behavioral competencies were important and crucial to their decisions to desist from criminal activity. They only indicated that 31% of what led them to desist from crime included environmental factors. The 69% of personal behavioral competencies included 38% of them indicating behavioral factors as a matter of importance, and 31%, almost equally divided, with respect to personal aspects being important to their decisions to desist. We see an interesting comparison between the results of the formerly incarcerated participants to that of the current or former parole and probation officers. Interestingly, only 17% of parole and probation officers indicated that environmental and behavioral factors were important. So that would include prison mistreatment and rule and legal compliance. Well, I expected this to be higher on the legal compliance aspect because that's what parole and probation officers do. They're interested in whether or not the former inmate is technically meeting the established requirements as set by the court for their probation or parole. But only 17% indicated that environmental factors were important. Also, surprisingly, former parole and probation officers indicated that personal aspects were important. 50% of them indicated an importance of personal aspects to successful reintegration. So that's 67% who indicated personal, behavioral, and environmental factors were important. But let's see what's going on here with the 100% personal and behavioral. 100% of the parole and probation officer participants indicated a personal and behavioral aspect being important to successful reintegration. So, personal and behavioral aspects go to human agency and self determination. So, what conclusions can we draw from the research? Well, it suggested that future research include a stratified sample that could facilitate a greater understanding of developmental influences on desistance decisions. It's already established in research, in historical research, that age can be a factor in successful reintegration, that as people get older, they tend to desist from crime. Well, the research would indicate that maybe just as they're noting that age is a factor, maybe developmental factors such as arrested development from trauma or abuse might affect how many times a person recidivates before they actually desist from crime. It's interesting, too, that the research would suggest that identifying cognitive implications at each stage of the desistance process. The research has clearly indicated that those who had been out of prison for 15 to 23 years had multiple reincarcerations before they came to a point of complete desistance from crime. So we have to consider cognitive implications at each stage of the desistance journey in determining how to influence more success for the individual at those stages. So, in other words, there might be some cognitive factors that need to be considered in the intervention programs, in the post release programs, that might make an individual more successful. And it's important to, as we indicated, to identify the triarchic influences at play at each stage of the criminal desistance process. So what came out of the research is don't hold it against a formerly incarcerated individual in the reintegration process if indeed they wind up going back because of technical violations, or maybe they're off probation or parole and they do some other crime and have to go back. We have to understand that the desistance journey is just that, a longitudinal process during which there may be multiple reincarcerations before a person finally desists from crime. So these turning points that are indicated when you read the full report will show that there were different turning points at each stage of the desistance process that had some cognitive influence on changing how an inmate or a formerly incarcerated individual perceive themselves in relations to past behavior. And those who were successful eventually determined that they got a new view of who they were as individuals, and they began to separate themselves from their past on some level to become the better individual that they found themselves to be. Research should also take a developmental criminological view of reintegration that measures the participants' outcomes from a holistic framework that includes personal, behavioral, and environmental aspects of the reentry experience. Future research should consider developmentally distinct aspects of the participants, so don't boilerplate the interventions, turning points related to desistance from criminal activity, and the implications of human agency in desistance decisions across the life course. So you can put somebody through a million different reintegration programs or mandatorily reported to programs, and unless and until there's an individual cognitive shift in that individual, none of the programs will be successful for that specific individual. Research design should include consistent consideration of participant specific qualitative data at each stage of quantitative analysis. So in other words, let's flesh out context in some of the quantitative data that's being collected with respect to recidivism and reintegration. Let's flesh it out by augmenting that research with some kind of longitudinal qualitative data, so to give context to where those individuals were or are in the reintegration and desistance process. We need to also analyze self-determinate psychodynamic shifts that emerge from participant narratives. As this research did, it showed how this desistance occurred and was fleshed out in context with where they were psychodynamically, not just quantitative aspects. It's something in these narratives that have significant implication to our understanding of desistance from crime, something that we need to leverage in tweaking or augmenting our existing programs. So don't focus on recidivism as a measurement of program success. Recidivism as a measure of program success is basing success on a standard of failure. We need to consider developmental and life course implications in individualized intervention planning, and we should consider developmental and life course progression of the individual participant. With respect to community advocacy and criminal justice policy, we should abandon rational choice-based restorative justice models that are based on a punitive, deficiency, and control paradigm. Any attempt to externally control the individual's success and reintegration is more control-based. We want to move toward an intrinsic influential methodology that deals with the internal processes and mindsets of that individual at whatever stage they're in with respect to desistance. We want to adopt an appreciative and opportunistic view that takes into account the perspectives of the reintegrating individuals. Anything that I've said within this presentation and a full list of references can be obtained through the download below of the entire research paper.